It's very difficult to explain the significance of this device, but I'll do my best. This is the Lenovo Legion Go S. It is going to be the very first device to officially launch with SteamOS on it. Eventually. That version will be black, have half the RAM, and come out in May. It will also be significantly cheaper. This is sort of a sneak preview of that. It just came out, runs Windows, has double the RAM, and it's also a lot more money. Luckily, we can just put Bazite on here, which is essentially just SteamOS. The best part of SteamOS is circumventing the UI nightmare that is Windows. So now we can have the best of both worlds. We can have the full compatibility of Windows if we need it, and we can also get a sneak peek of what the first official third-party SteamOS device will eventually look like. SteamOS and Bazite work like a Steam Deck. They play most of the PC games that you're going to want to play. But if you have straight on Windows, you'll be able to play games like Destiny, Call of Duty, some games that use other launchers that might be a little harder to get going on a Steam Deck. But I'm telling you, that more console-like UI experience makes it way more worth it to have a UI like Bazite or SteamOS than having to deal with Windows every time you boot this thing up. So that explains a little bit of the significance of this device. It will eventually be the first third-party SteamOS device. But that doesn't explain the significance of this one that I have in my hands on the marketplace. An original Lenovo Legion Go retails for $700, and sales are very easy to come by. I just found some for around $600. I've seen it for as low as $530. That device is similarly powerful, in some cases a little more powerful, and it's way cheaper. I'll spare you the trouble of watching this whole video, just get that. But if you're curious about how the first official SteamOS machine will function, then you might want to stick around. There are a lot of reasons to like this device. Lenovo created a great handheld here. They just made a questionable move with the chip choice. It feels really good. It has a lot of small details that are wonderful new additions, and this screen is beautiful. But it is also plagued by at least one major issue that hasn't changed since the original Lenovo Legion Go. That nasty fan sound. And yeah, it's a lot of money and not that powerful. This video is sponsored by Factor. Hey, I'm gonna order food. You want something? Nah, I got this new app I want to try. It's an AI chef. No, don't do it. No. Oh, here we go again. Hey, man. Hey, what's up? Oh. Hey, man. What do you guys want? Oh. I don't know. What can you do? Yeah, like whatever. We can do burgers, a little gazpacho, a little lo mein, a little Chinese. Oh yeah, yeah. I like that. Yeah, gazpacho. Yeah, I'll do. All right, cool, man. Hey, is it cool? My girlfriend comes over.
Yeah, I don't
actually.
know. I mean,
it's cool, man. Don't it's. I mean, it's a little bit of an overreach on my part. I don't want. Factor's fresh and never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Skip the grocery store prep work and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-curated, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. And they've got smoothies, they've got juices, and they've got wellness shots. Cool. So 2 gazpachos. I'm just gonna need one of you to push me over towards the stove over there. Oh, yeah, just push me over to the stove. Sure. Yeah, but don't touch me! Just touch the chair. Just go low on the chair. Yeah, I got it. Far away from me. I'm a very skinny man. Sometimes I forget to eat, so having Factor ready to go in the fridge has been really helpful for me. Sometimes I like to throw it in the oven. You can stick it in the microwave for just 2 minutes. Head to factor75.com and use code 50. You hungry? To get 50% off of your first Factor box and free shipping. That's code 50. You hungry? Get 50% off and free shipping. Yeah, just move me the lower on the chair. Okay, I'm trying. Yeah, don't get anywhere near me. Is this a good touch? Don't. You're doing it. Okay, you're doing good. Hey, wait. I just got a Rocket Money notification. This AI chef is $1,000 a month? What? Hey, guys, come on. We're all cool here, right? Why couldn't you have told us that before you got started? I mean, you wouldn't let my girlfriend come in here. Oh, you're gonna toss that around and put it on us? Yeah, what's the problem? It would have been so easy. It would have made my life a lot easier. We got a whole other person. I'm not letting that. I just got a Factor promo code. Well, I think we all learned a valuable lesson today. We learned that while artificial intelligence is getting better every day, it still can never fully replace what requires a human element in our lives. Plus, that guy was weird as hell, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Whole time. The vibes were off from start to finish. One thing that I noticed, which is a bit upsetting, is that the Lenovo Legion Go S does not come with a case. The original Legion Go did. So that's already points off. But I do really like the way this thing feels. It's a very large device, which I wasn't really expecting. It's on the large side compared to other PC handhelds. It's got an 8-inch screen, which is pretty large, but still slightly smaller than the original Lenovo Legion Go. But it's about the same size as the MSI Claw 8, which was also huge. The Claw 8 had pretty terrible ergonomics. Its massive size did not feel very good in the hands. The Legion Go S is about the same size, but the ergonomics are fantastic. It's got enough junk in that trunk to grip onto nicely, and your hands fall right onto the buttons, which are regular membrane buttons that feel just fine. The D-pad is also fine. It's one of these disc-shaped D-pads, but it snaps to 4 cardinal directions. It's pretty good. The Go S has analog shoulder buttons, but it also has this feature you might have seen on some Elite-style controllers. You can choose whether or not the triggers act as analog triggers or hair triggers. I love this. I like to keep them as hair triggers pretty much all the time unless I'm playing a racing game or something that requires analog. The option is very nice to have. The Go S still has a trackpad, although it is impossibly tiny. I actually really like this dinky little trackpad. I hardly ever used the original Legion Go trackpad. I think that trackpad was horrible. This trackpad actually feels kind of nice, which is surprising. I've been using it like a lot more than the old trackpad. We're one step closer to getting that IBM nipple back. One thing that Nippleback. I used to listen to that band. One thing that really bothers me about it though is that it has this really terrible haptic feedback sound. You hear that? It's very harsh. It happens every time you put your finger on it. And I don't think you can turn it off. It even happens in the BIOS. So it's like a system level thing. The screen is not OLED, but I did have to double check because it looks very bright and vibrant and contrasty. It actually fooled me. I thought it was OLED for a second. Games look gorgeous on here. People think that OLED screens are like the end game. Deep black levels aren't the only thing that matter in this world. The Go S's screen is 1200p, 120 hertz with variable refresh rate. The original Go was 1600p, 144 hertz, but did not have variable refresh rate. A lot of people in this space don't value resolution in these handhelds. They don't think it's that noticeable on a small screen like this. I think the difference between 720p and 1080p is very noticeable. And I'd much prefer a 1080p screen, or in this case, a 1200p screen. I think over 1200p is a bit of a reach. The original Legion Go screen was 1600p, and at that point, we're not really going to be playing a lot of these games over full HD. You're really stressing the processor at that point. But I think 720p versus full HD on screens this size is noticeable. And I think the trade-off that we have here with a slightly lower resolution screen, but adding variable refresh rate, I think is worth it here. That might be the reason some games look pretty decent on here. That being said, you might lose a couple frames because this thing's a little weaker, which sucks. I hate that. Along with the launch of the Go S comes the new Legion Space. Every PC handheld needs a launcher to hide the desktop Windows UI and get you into your games easier. This new Legion Space UI is terrible. With this update, it's basically a storefront. Hey Lenovo, I'm never gonna buy a game like this. If you click on a game here, it takes you to a website called Games Planet. What the f is Games Planet? I'll never use this. And here's my library. Whatever that is, with OneNote, okay. The OneNote settings. Thanks. There's also seemingly no way to close Legion Space once it's open. Some launchers let you just X out of them. Some have an option to close. No, this has none. The only way to close it, which is something my chat actually had to tell me, You have to press the button. There's a button to help you quickly get into and out of this terrible interface, and you're stuck with that button forever.
Why does that come up every time? Stop!
Yeah, I'd recommend just having Steam open in big picture mode if you intend on keeping Windows on here. Don't deal with that. This device does have 32 gigabytes of RAM, which is double what the original Legion Go has. I think it's also the reason why this one is so expensive. A 16 gigabyte version is coming later when the SteamOS version arrives, but that will be a lot weaker. This device also has AMD's new Z2 Go chip, which is exclusive to Lenovo. It is not a sequel to the Z1 Extreme. It is, in fact, shittier. A lot of times, the weaker chip is explained away by being more efficient, but this one isn't even more efficient. At max power, it draws more power than any of the Z1 Extreme handhelds that I've used. You can crank this thing up to 40 watts when it's plugged in, but it actually is pulling more than that. It's pulling up to 43 watts. I saw it pull up to 46 watts at one point. The GPU can hover around 43 watts, and the CPU is a bit more sporadic, jumping between 37 and rarely going up to 40, but it does go up there. On battery, it pulls 33 watts, which is still pretty damn high. The battery's decent. If you're playing Call of Duty, you can expect a little over an hour of game time. I got somewhere around 2.5 hours downloading stuff, installing drivers, pre-compiling shaders, and updating the device at the full 33 watt TDP, which honestly isn't terrible. But the benchmarks are pretty disappointing. This is the lowest performing device that I have tested so far by a significant margin. The good news is that on battery, the performance didn't really drop all that much, which is interesting because we're going from 43 watts all the way down to 33 watts of TDP. So I guess if you want to lower the fan noise or save a little bit of battery life, you can lower the TDP down a little bit and it won't have that much of an impact on performance. A lot of people like using these devices at lower TDP modes to improve that battery life. I like playing everything at the max power possible because I like to play these things in short bursts and I want as much power coming at me as possible. I want the most frame rates that I can get. I'm also constantly pushing these things to the limits because I want to see what they're capable of. A lot of these handheld manufacturers are pushing these devices as being greater at lower TDP modes. The MSI Claw was being marketed pretty much exclusively at 17 watts when it can go all the way up past 30, which is interesting because it ran a lot worse at 17 watts. The frame rate was all sporadic, so I don't know why they marketed it like that. That being said, I still don't know why you would buy this to run at lower power modes because it's on the higher end. It's pretty expensive. Right now, it's on battery saving mode, and the fan ain't doing nothing. You can't hear it like at all unless you put your ear all the way up to it. And I'm sure you can play some pretty decent games like that, but I'm already having a rough time playing Call of Duty on here as it is. We'll get to that. At full power, the noise is just horrible. The original Lenovo Legion Go also has a notoriously loud fan. I haven't opened either of these devices up, but they look like they have a pretty similar configuration. I wouldn't be surprised if the fans are exactly the same. This one might even be a little worse. It's pretty damn loud. It does significantly ruin the experience. These speakers aren't the best, and you genuinely can't hear much over the fans unless you blast the speakers. It's like comical how terrible these fans are. That being said, I ended up actually using the original Lenovo Legion Go a decent amount despite the fan noise. I just really liked that nice big screen, and I also like the fact that it can be used as a tablet. There's a chance that I can look past that fan noise, but it'll be difficult here because this device is a little bit weaker and it's $730. It's going to be hard to look past all of those things. But look, benchmarks aren't everything. Sometimes they lie to us. Let's play some actual games on here. We have both Windows and Bazzite on here. It's dual booted, so you can pick whichever one you want to boot into. I don't think that SteamOS will give you any extra performance boosts over what Bazzite already has. I think they will be very similar. So this is probably a pretty good representation of what SteamOS will eventually look and perform like. And there are merits to having both Windows and Bazite or SteamOS dual booted. For example, Call of Duty is a great example of a game that will only work on the Windows side. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to set up on any device. The file size is massive. It has to restart 14 times before it starts to work. It's always sluggish when it first opens, and the shaders take forever to compile, and I had to do that multiple times for some reason. We're looking at minimum settings at full resolution, but only at 600p render resolution, which is pretty abysmal. We got AMD FSR upscaling because it was on by default. No frame generation. That's all getting somewhere between 60 to 70 frames per second, which is not terrible. The 50% render resolution looks fine with the AMD upscaling. You see some jagged edges sometimes, but I would probably leave the settings like this when I play. It looks fine. And this isn't even with frame gen on. If you turn frame gen on, we get between 70 and 90 frames. And honestly, it looks pretty smooth. It might be a placebo effect, but with frame gen and super resolution on at the same time, I feel like I'm getting these weird artifacts sometimes. Some weird pop in here or there. I'm not sure how I feel about it. In my brief time with it, it seems fine. I was kind of happy with how it looked without frame gen, so I could take it or leave it. I might leave it off. Fortnite is another game I'm only going to be playing on Windows. It picked the settings for me. It defaulted to 1200p with super resolution upscaling. I don't think frame gen was on. I didn't see it in the settings at all. Loading in was extremely rough. I was getting what felt like 3 frames at the recommended settings. Changing the settings to low didn't fix anything. This was all using DirectX 11. Changing the rendering mode to low graphical performance made it run a little better, but it was still chunky. Frame dips all over the place. I do not have a lot of confidence in that frame rate counter. This is not a good Fortnite machine. You're gonna want to drop the resolution way down. This is another example of a game you might want to dual boot for because it's going to be a lot easier to get it running on Windows than it would in Bazite. You can get it in there, but you got to do a lot of tomfoolery. Resident Evil 4 was getting us under 40 frames per second at 1200p. This is pretty similar to what we would get on the original Legion Go at full HD. I also noticed it took a long time to kind of smooth out on the first load. There were significant frame drops for a bit. Dropping the resolution to 800p only gets us around 50 frames though, which is like Steam Deck levels of performance, which is not something you want to hear from a brand new $730 handheld with 32 gigabytes of RAM in it. In Bazite, Resident Evil 4 gets us around 40 frames per second as well. Dropping the resolution to half gets us somewhere between 55 and 60 frames per second. So a little tiny performance boost in Bazite, but nothing to be too excited about. I'm not expecting any performance difference at all between Windows and Bazite. In my past testing on other handhelds, I would get an average of 1 more frame per second on Bazite for some reason. On this one, there seems to be a little more of a performance boost, but it's still not anything to write home about. The first game I actually loaded up on the Lenovo Legion Go S was Marvel Rivals using Bazite. I actually play a decent amount of Marvel Rivals on my PC, but also on my ROG Ally X running Bazite. That's how I play it in bed when no one's watching.
This thing's so small compared to the Go S.
And I actually play it with slight motion controls. It's pretty cool to aim a little bit with the gyro. And I don't know what's going on with the ROG Ally X and Bazite or whatever, but the motion controls on here using Bazite are like way better. They feel real accurate and way more responsive. I love this, but only in Bazite. I don't know what happened, but the motion controls in Windows on the Legion Go S are ass. It has to be Lenovo's software. They really got to work on that. Anyway, Marvel Rivals also looks really great on here. It's what made me realize the screen was so nice. In Bazite with frame gen on, we're getting somewhere around 80 frames per second, sometimes shooting up to 90 frames per second in the practice range. But I noticed in actual games, I was getting realistically around 70 frames. When Strange opens a portal in the practice range, it dips down to under 50 frames sometimes. But this is at 1200p, so honestly, this is pretty great. I could play like this and be totally content. This game is also what made me realize how great this screen is. I think the variable refresh rate is working even in Bazzite. You're also looking at AMD frame gen in Bazzite, which honestly looks decent. I'm not upset that these frames are fake. They look real to me, damn it. And trust me, for this game, you're gonna want to put frame gen on. Otherwise, it's looking pretty rough. You'll also notice it's sucking up a pretty consistent 44 watts, which is way more than I was expecting. On Windows, we're getting pretty similar results, maybe slightly less frames. It's usually around 70 frames per second in practice, but only in the 50s in an actual match. Opening a portal drops it down to as low as 40 frames per second. If we turn off frame gen, we're only getting somewhere in the 50s. So I would probably just leave that on. It's worth noting that the Ally X running Bazzite gets somewhere between 70 and 80 frames per second with no frame gen on. And I also play it on there at 1080p. I notice it looks way better. That game looks terrible at 720p. I don't really see a place for this thing in my life. I'm probably gonna keep playing Marvel Rivals on my Ally X. If this thing was a powerhouse, I could see this thing replacing some of my other devices, but it's not. All I'm interested in is playing my newest PC games on here in the best way possible, and I just don't see that happening. This thing has a lot of other great things going for it. It just lacks in the things that matter the most: performance, and a couple of little other things. It is Windows after all, and Windows does have its quirks. It took me a bit to notice, but my touchscreen just stopped working in the middle of me testing it. It forced me to use a mouse. A quick restart fixed that though, so that's not that big of a deal. It's just a little silly little Windows quirk. Lenovo's FPS counter just doesn't work at all. Never has, never will. I remember having the exact same issue with the original Legion Go. I ended up installing AMD Adrenalin just for its FPS counter, and that's also what shows us TDP in real time, so it's good to have. But downloading AMD Adrenalin and the AMD drivers is what made me need to recompile all my shaders. The drivers did not seem to increase the performance at all compared to the Lenovo drivers. In fact, at first they performed worse, but they smoothed out eventually. I mentioned before that the Legion Space launcher is bad. The side menu also takes an obnoxiously long time to load in. The motion controls in Windows are also very bad. And I've already mentioned the fan noise. We have to harp on that because that is enough to be a deal breaker. All that being said, there's still a lot of great things here. The screen, even though it's only an LCD screen, is fantastic and looks beautiful. I love having a big screen like this. And I love having my variable refresh rate. The ergonomics are also great. That's not something I normally care for, but it's important in a big, heavy handheld like this. The D-pad and the analog triggers are also great. The thumbstick is nice and smooth. This is a well-designed handheld. All of the great things about this handheld are external. All of the flaws are internal. You know what actually fixes a lot of these flaws? Bazzite, or eventually SteamOS. You don't need to worry about a launcher with SteamOS. You have the best launcher already. I haven't had the touchscreen drop out once in Bazzite. The FPS counter always works. Plus, you get all this other cool telemetry and it's a click away. No need to worry about drivers in SteamOS, you already have the best ones. The motion controls just work. The fan noise, well, there's nothing you can really do about that. SteamOS can fix almost everything that's wrong here, but that's not coming out till May. This particular device that we have in our hands, there's almost no reason for this thing to exist. There must have been some sort of exclusive chip deal with AMD or something that like forced them to make this device. In May, the SteamOS version will come out, and that one is only going to be $500. So that sounds nice, but it will only have 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is a bit concerning because this one has 32 and it's already not that powerful. I know this is very confusing, but I'm going to try my best here. There are 3 versions of this device. This is the first one that we have here in our hands. This is Windows, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it is $730, and you can buy it right now. The next 2 that are coming out, there is a Windows version that only has 16 gigabytes of RAM, and that one is $600. And then there's a third one that's coming out at the same time in May that is only $500, and that has Steam OS and also 16 gigabytes of RAM. So the Steam OS version is $100 less. So get that if you don't care about having Windows at all. I suspect that the Steam OS version is going to perform maybe slightly better than a Steam Deck, which is really weird because you can get a Steam Deck for as low as $400. So I just really don't know where these things are going to fit in the marketplace. It's going to be very interesting when that thing comes out. I'm really going to need to run some tests on that. There is some info on even more versions that will have a Z1 Extreme chip instead of the slightly worse Z2 Go chips, which would honestly be pretty cool if we can get that in 32 gigabytes of RAM. But this might not make it to America, unfortunately. It'll be available in some markets. I'm like not really interested in a Steam Deck competitor unless it's like wildly different than a Steam Deck. Give me a powerhouse or give me something small for lower powered games. If it's ostensibly the same for the same price, what's the point? I don't know. This Z2 Go chip that's in here is exclusive to Lenovo. Valve is also reportedly not currently working with any other manufacturers for third-party SteamOS devices like this one will be. So it's unclear what's expected of SteamOS in the future. That doesn't mean they won't work with other manufacturers. I suspect they will. They just aren't right now. Also, it's assumed that in May we will get an official release of SteamOS that we can put on any device that we want. They've sort of talked about how it'll probably work on the ROG Ally, for example. But there's no official information on this, no date or anything. So we don't know what's going to happen with SteamOS or when it's going to launch or anything other than it's going to be on a Lenovo device in May. Do not buy this in the hopes that you can eventually put SteamOS on here. But in the meantime, Bazite was pretty easy to install. I have a whole video on that, so I don't want to get too into it. But that's how I've been doing most of my gaming lately, and I absolutely love it. I'm welcoming SteamOS with open arms when it comes. Bazite will still be around. I'm not sure what their role will be. Maybe they'll support more types of devices, more stuff. Maybe Bazite will fill in the gaps of compatibility that SteamOS is lacking. I'm just happy to play my PC games with the most console-like experience possible, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to that with SteamOS. But it's a wait-and-see kind of thing. Despite this device's lackluster performance, I'm excited for May. I'm excited to see what SteamOS will bring. What do you guys think about the Lenovo Legion Go S and SteamOS in general? Are you waiting to see what you're going to do with that? Is that something you want to put on your PC handheld, whichever one you got? What about this interested you at all? I want to know. The only thing that interested me was the fact that it's going to be the first official SteamOS machine. Was there something else about this that should have blown me away? Is there a particular game that this runs better than anything else? I'm going to stick to my ROG Ally X in the meantime. Leave it in the comments below, at me on Twitter, any and all this other social media garbage. You should go to wolfdenapparel.com and get one of these shirts or one of the other various doodads and tchotchkes we got over there. I messed around with this on live here on YouTube. I do that every once in a while. Turn on notifications so you know when that happens and you can join the chat. The YouTube chat, I'm mostly just yelling at those people. We're also on twitch.tv/wolfden. The most important thing you could do to help support us over here, you can just subscribe. Turn on that bell and share this video with a friend who's thinking about getting a PC handheld to solve one of their problems. Thank you very much. Have yourself a good week.